Hey guys, and welcome to this short beginner course for combat. So as you can see, we're in a basic third-person template. If I hit play, character can run around, really simple stuff. So what I'm going to do is create a basic root motion system, and we're going to add some basic functionality for attacking, equipping, and stuff like that. So let's get started. I'm going to create a new folder. We're going to call this combat system. Yeah, sure. Right click, add a new blueprint class. We're going to create an actor component. We're going to call this bbc_combat. Now, we can open this up and let's head to our third person character blueprint. And we're going to clear everything from here. So I'm going to highlight everything, hit Ctrl X to cut. I'm going to delete the variables from here. Hit compile and save, and let's head back to BBC Combat. I'm going to delete everything from here as well, and I'm going to paste. Now, I'm not going to be using the gamepad input, so I'm going to delete this. I'm going to bring this down a bit, and since we're going to be using root motion, we won't need this. So I'm going to delete that, and I'm not going to do any jumping in this one, so I'm going to delete this as well. Right, so the first thing we want to do is set the target of our camera input. So the target is pawn. So as you can see, we have an error. The group itself is not a pawn because this is a component. I'm going to right click and search for get owner. Now this get owner node, the target is actor component, so we need to get the pawn target. So how do we get that? We're going to do get instigator. And if you highlight this and hover, you can see instigator. Pawn responsible for damage and other gameplay events. Highlight the end, you'll see that it says pawn object reference. So we're going to use that. I'm going to connect this here to the target, highlight this and collapse it to a function. I'm going to call this get instigator. I'm going to make this function pure and connect it to the other node right here. Hit compile and that error should go away. Now, we're going to create a few variables. The first one is going to be called perform run. The other will be forward backward. This is going to be a float. Another for right left. Let's create another Boolean variable. We're going to call this combat enabled. Another call is performing action. Let's create one more Boolean variable. It's called is performing attack. Next, let's create a equip montage. So let's call this equip weapon. This is going to be of type anim montage. Create another one for holster weapon. Again, if it is of type anim montage. Let's create another of type anim montage, and we'll call this attacks. And this one is going to be an array. Now let's create the socket names for where we want to attach and holster our weapon. So I'm going to call this equip socket. It's going to be of type name, and this is also going to be a single variable, not an array. I'm going to create another one for holster. So holster socket. We're going to need an integer called attack index. And I believe that's about it. So we compile and save. Now, we're going to add a branch right here in the input axis, move forward, backward. and we're going to check if perform run is true or not. So if it's true, then we want to set forward backward on the false to its default access value. Now, what if it's true? If it's true, then we need to multiply the access value by 2 and then set forward and backward off of the true pin in your branch. Now we're going to copy this, paste it right here, and connect it for the right and left. And the only thing we're going to do different is swap out the forward and backward variables with the right and left ones. Great. Compile, save. Next, let's right click and hit the 8 key to create a basic key binding here. And we're going to do a check. Let's do a check. So when we press, let's say, left shift, we want to check if perform run is true or not. And if it is false, then we want to set perform run to be true. And when we release the key, we want to set perform run to be false. So I'm going to highlight this and leave a little comment here. We want to call this perform run. Next, let's see. Okay, yeah. So let's head back to our content folder. Combat system. I'm going to right click. I'm going to search for a animation blueprint. I'm going to select the UE4 skeleton, as that's the skeleton that my animations are using. I'm going to call this ABP_combat. I'm going to open this up, head to the event graph, and the first thing we want to do is check if the pawn owner is valid. And if it is, we need to check if the component is valid as well, because as you can see here, it's not slotted. So to avoid this error, even though we will have it added here, it's always good to check if it's valid or not. So ensure to add BPC combat to your player character, and we can close this. Next, let's create an interface, blueprint interface. I'm going to call this BPI anim BP data. Open it up. I'm going to call this get combat component. I'm going to add an input of type BPC combat. I'm going to name this to combat component. Hit compile and save. Now in BPC combat, add a begin play node by holding the P key and left clicking. What we need to do now is add a function. We're going to call this get main instance. What we're going to do is get the player character. From the player character, we want to get the mesh. And from the mesh, we want to get the anim instance. Now this is the target for the animation blueprint. So the function that we just created is called get combat component. So that's what we're going to do. First, let's return the value here, add an output to the get main instance function, connect it, and make this function pure. Now on the begin play node, let's get the main instance and let's search for get combat component message. So the target will be the get main instance function and the combat component will be self. So let's get a reference to self. Now I'm going to highlight this and call this initialize component. Compile and save. Now in ABP combat, let's head to class settings, add a new interface, and we're going to add the BPI and MVP data. In the interfaces section right here, let's double click on it to create the event. I'm going to promote this to a variable. Then I'm going to drag in this variable. I'm going to get it, right click, and convert this to a validated get. Now, only if the pawn owner is valid and if the combat component is valid, then we will proceed. So I'm going to get the combat component here. I'm going to get forward, backward. And I also want to get the right and left. I'm going to promote these two variables. So forward and backward, right and left. And we need one more. Combat enabled. Great. Now let's head to the anim graph. I'm going to right click and search for a slot, default slot. Connect this here. I'm going to do a blend poses by bool. Right. I'm going to slot in the combat enabled variable. And only if combat enabled is true, then we will play the armed animations, and if it's false, then we use the unarmed animations. I'm going to hit compile and save for now. So we're almost finishing the animation blueprint. So let's do something really quick. Let's head back to the third person character, and we're going to swap out our mesh and our animation blueprint. So I'm going to select the UE4 mesh and our ABP combat animation blueprint that we just created. Now, if I hit play, you can see the character can move his camera around, but he can't move. And this is because the axis value reads from 0 to 1 to 2 and so on. Right here, we're checking if perform run is true, then we multiply the value to 2 and set the variable. Otherwise, use the default value of 1. So 0 will be idle, 1 will be walking, and 2 will be running. The interfaces is already set, so let's create a new function. I'm going to call this get mesh. We're going to open up the get main instance function. I'm going to copy this part of it, and we're going to paste it right here. Drag this to the input to create an output, and there you have your mesh function. All right, let's create another interface. So I'm going to duplicate this BPI and MBP data. I'm going to call this BPI underscore combat data. Open this up, and we need a function called set combat enabled. It's going to be of type Boolean as an input, and I'm going to rename this to enabled. We need another one for reset combat, and this won't need any inputs or outputs. The next thing we'll need to do is right click here again, create a new blueprint class, and this time we're going to create an anim notify. I'm going to select this. I'm going to call this AN for anim notify underscore reset combat. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to call this AN underscore toggle combat. So for the reset combat, let's open this up. We want to override a function. We're going to override received notify. And from the mesh components, we're going to get the owner of the component. And we want to get the component by class, as this will be our target. And the component class will be BPC combat. I'm going to set the return value to be true. And from the get component by class node, we want to call reset combat message. The message is the function that we created right here in the interface. Connect these up, and that's it for this one. I'm going to close the interfaces as well. Now we can open up AN toggle combat. We want to override receive notify again, and let's get owner. Let's get the components by class, Again, this is going to be BPC combat. And we want to call set combat enabled message. Set the return value to be true, and we want to promote the enabled to a variable. We want to make sure this variable is instance editable. Hit compile and save, and now we can close this. So we can close the third person character as well. And now let's set up the movement for our player character, as he is in the A pose right now. I'm going to right click, head to animation, blend space. I'm going to select my UE4 skeleton. I'm going to call this BS for blend space underscore unarmed. Open this up. And I'm going to rename this to be right, left. The horizontal axis will be right, left. The minimum axis value will be -2 and 2 for the maximum. As you recall, we are multiplying the axis value by 2. And so 2 will be forward, run forward, and -2 will be run backward. 1 will be walk forward, -1 will be walk backward. Stuff like that. So let's snap this to grid. Set the smoothing time to be 0.5. For the vertical axis, it's going to be forward / backward. Again, the value will be -2 and 2. Snap to grid, smoothing time 0.5. So I'm going to head back to the content folder. I'm going to duplicate this BS unarmed. I'm going to call this BS underscore combat. So you'll see why I did this in a bit. So I'm going to open up BS unarmed, and I'm going to slot in all of my unarmed animations. So for the center of this blend space, add value 0 at the right left and 0 forward backward will be our idle. So for our walking, so let's get walk forward. This will be placed at right left value 0, but forward back value at 1. So forward right will be at -1 for right left, but 1 for forward backward. This one will be 1 for right left and 1 for forward backward. For walk left will be -1 right left and 0 for forward backward, and respective for right. So I'm going to place all of these now. Backward left, backward right, and backward. So for the running, let's get our run forward, place at the top. Forward left will go to the end here at value 2 and -2. Forward right will be at value 2 and 2. Left, right, and we need the back, so run backwards, backward left, and backward right. Save. Now in ABP combat, in the anim graph, we can search for BS underscore unarmed, and if combat enabled is false, then we are using the unarmed blend space, as explained earlier. And we need 2 variables here, which we already have: forward backward, right left. Let's copy this and paste again and connect this to the true pose. And the only difference, we're going to drag our BS combat onto this BS unarmed to replace it. And there you go. So hit compile and save. Now if I hit play, the character should be able to move around. So you can see we have some issues. So we need to head to our animations. I'm going to filter this. So I'm going to select animation sequence, highlight all of our root motion animations, asset actions, bulk edit via property matrix, and I'm going to select force root lock and enable root motion. Close this I'm going to save all. Now if I hit play, that issue has gone away, but we have another one. Now this one is an easy fix. Head to your ABP combat, head to class defaults, and change the root motion mode to root motion from everything. Hit compile and save again, hit play, you can see that issue is now resolved. So you can test this out, and if you can try pressing the left shift key, and you can perform run. Right, cool. So now we can close the animation blueprint. Now let's set up the animations for our BS combat, so our blend space for combat. I'm going to uncheck this filter. I'm going to open BS combat, and let's slot in the animations. Idle, backwards, backwards left, backwards right, forward, forward left and right, and we have left and right. And now let's do the walking. So walk backward, backward left and right, forward, forward left and right, and we have left and right for walking. Save. Great. So now we don't need to pop back into our animation blueprint since we already slotted this. So let's create a function, well, an event really, but input. So I'm gonna hit T and full stop to create a custom event. I'm gonna call this toggle combat. I'm also going to create a key binding again. I'm going to use my tab key, and we want to call the event that we just created toggle combat. Now right here, we're going to add a branch and create a new function. So this function is going to be called can perform action. So the first thing we want to do is get the owner. We want to get component by class. And the component class that we want to get is the character movement component. And we want to check if the character is moving on the ground. And if is performing action not true, because we don't want to be performing an action when we are already performing an action. And we want to return this. Again, make this function pure. Compile, save, and then back to the event graph. And we want to bring in this function and connect it to our branch. Next, what we want to do is set is performing action to be true. Then we want to get our main instance function, and we want to say montage play. From the montage to play, we want to drag off and say select. And we want to set the return value type to be duration. For the index, is going to get our combat enable variable and slot it in right here. And for our true and false, the holster will be into true and the equip will be into false. So if combat enable is false and we press this, it will then equip the weapon. And if it's true and we press it again, it will holster the weapon. I'm going to highlight all of this and create a comment called toggle combat. Next, let's implement our interface. So head to class settings, and we're going to implement the BPI combat data interface. Head to our interface section here, and we want to, firstly, let's do the reset combat. So let's drag in our is performing action. So I'm going to set it to false, set is performing attack to be false as well, and set our attack index to be 0. And that is all for our reset combat function. Next, let's do the set combat enabled. And let's set our combat enabled variable right here. Next, let's get our mesh, and we want to say attach component to component. So we want to attach the weapon mesh to the character's hand or to his holster socket in runtime. So from the change it from the target and add it to the parent, because the character's mesh is the parent, and the target will be of type static mesh. So let's create a new variable. We'll call this weapon mesh. It's going to be of type static mesh component. Hit compile, save. So it requires a target, and the target will be our weapon mesh that we just created. We're going to change the location, rotation, and scale rule to be snap to target. Compile, save, and from the socket name, we want to say select again. And we want to select based on if combat is enabled or not. And if combat enabled is true, then we use the equip socket. And if it's false, then we use the holster socket. Highlight and create a comment, set combat enabled. Great. So the next thing we want to do is add the weapon mesh. So I'm going to create a function for this called add weapon mesh. And we want to add a component by class. It's going to be of type static mesh component. The target is going to be owner, so let's get owner component. And from the owner, we want to get actor transform, and this will be our relative transform. Next, we want to set our weapon mesh variable as the return value, and from there we can head to our event graph and copy the attach component to component node. I'm going to bring this to the end, and from the weapon mesh, first we want to say set static mesh and select your weapon mesh. I'm going to select my katana, and we want to attach component to component, and the socket that we want to attach it to will be our holster socket. This is the socket that we're going to use to attach the weapon on begin play. Compile and save. So on begin play here, we're going to drag in our add weapon mesh function and plug it up. So now if I hit play, you can see at my feet there is the katana, and that's because we haven't specified a socket or a bone to attach the weapon to. We'll add a comment, add weapon mesh. So we have one last function to create. So I'm going to create a new custom event, and this is going to be called perform attack. So we're going to create one more function. So let's duplicate the can perform action, and we're going to rename this to can perform attack. And we want to check if it's moving on ground, and also if it's performing action not true. We need one more, so I'm going to duplicate this. Well, two more actually. And we want to check if is performing attack is false. So I'm going to replace the variable right here. And we also want to check if combat enabled is true. So only if combat is enabled, then can we attack. All right, so let's go. We're going to add a branch. And we're going to add in our can perform attack function. We want to set is performing attack to be true. Next, let's get our attacks variable, and let's search for get. So we're going to get a copy, and we also want to get the attack index. So I'm going to straighten this out. So from the get node here, we want to first let's get our add an instance, main instance function, and we're going to do a montage play. It's going to be duration again, and the montage to play will be our get. From here, we want to get our attack index and increment it. So when we attack once, this will be true, so we won't be able to attack again until we reset the combat. And when combat is reset, we'll be able to attack again, and so forth. So connect this here. And then we need to check if our attack's last index, so whatever our last index is in our array of attacks, if it's greater than, well, if our attack index is greater than the last index in the array. Add a branch. And if this is true, then we want to set the attack index back to 0. I'm going to create a key binding. I'm going to use my left mouse button for the attacks. And I'm going to call the perform attack event that we just created. Highlight this, create a comment. I'm going to call this perform attack. Now that we have all of this already set up, the only thing we need to do is specify the socket names and add our montages. And we'll be doing that in the next one. See ya.